Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Football Manager 2018 Beta with Zebu Nation. And here we are back again with FC Dallas in the MLS. Now, I've advanced a little bit through the preseason into the first game of the regular season of the MLS, and this will give you an opportunity to take a look at what happens during the preseason of the MLS and what happens once you get to registration day, which is a very, very interesting day in the MLS. A lot of things happen with the roster and all that kind of stuff. So up until this point, in the off season, in the preseason, you can basically sign whoever you want. But when it comes to registration day, some things happen, and namely, they clamp down on your roster. They tell you this is your salary cap. You can't pay players any more than this. They tell you these are the most number of players you can have. These are the international players you can have. All that stuff. You've got to conform with that, or bad things happen. Basically, your players get cut from your squad. So let's take a look at our squad. Take a look at our registration. Now, as you can see here, we've got 26 players of a maximum of 30, 3 designated players, 6 internationals of a maximum of 7. Now, if you watched our previous video, you might be wondering, like, what the heck? What's going on? How come you can only have 7 when you told me that teams can have a maximum of 8? Well, these international slots are actually a tradable commodity. You can trade them in, trade them out. So if you want to, you can have more than 8 international players. You just have to get another MLS team to agree to trade you their slots. And that's what I did. I traded one of my slots away, mainly because I wasn't using it, but also just to kind of demonstrate that to you, to show you guys that this is a tradable resource that you can use to get stuff. And I'll show you what their value is when I go through the checklist and get to the transfers. And then I've got 10 off-budget players, 6 reserve players, and only 1 non-homegrown reserve player. And this sort of comes to an issue that I got when I got to the registration day. I didn't realize that they were going to make this so what is the word I'm looking for? They were going to be such a stickler for these rules. Now, in FM17, when it came to off-budget players, if you had more than 10 off-budget players, the game just kind of said, it's not that big deal. We'll count, I think it was 8 last year. I think it was 8 off-budget players. We'll count those as off-budget players, and then anybody else who's off-budget, we'll just consider them as a senior contract player, and it's no problem. Now, in the beta for FM18, they're not doing that. They're saying this is a hard number. 10 off-budget players and no more. I don't know if this is a bug. I don't know if this is a rule change within MLS, which I could see the logic for it in MLS, because what you have to do if this happens to you is you have to sign those players beforehand, before cutoff day. You have to sign them to a senior contract. You basically have to give them a new contract and say, okay, we can't have you as an off-budget player anymore. We have to give you a real contract. So in terms of MLS in the real world, that's a way to get veteran players more money. To say, okay, you can't sign half your team to this minimum contract. You have to give them real contracts. And if, from a real world stance, from a collective bargaining kind of stance, I don't know if they have collective bargaining in most leagues in Europe. It's there's a strong tradition of unions in sports here in the United States. So, the unions might collectively bargain with the league and say, look, we want our veterans to be paid more money. We don't want them to all get shuffled off to these minimum salary contracts. So in order to do that, let's limit the number of teams, or limit the number per team that you can have. So like I said, I can see the real world reason for doing that, but it could also just be a bug with the game. I don't know. We'll see when the real version comes out. I guess I could research that now that I'm thinking of it. I can research and see if it's a real thing or if it's a bug. But whatever. For now, for the beta, you can only have a maximum of 10 off-budget players. So because of that, I had to let go a few of my non-homegrown players who were on those reserve contracts and just let them go. And where they went, they don't stay on your roster like they might in other leagues around the world. Here, they just get cut from your team and they go into a waiver draft where all the other teams in the league can go through a draft system and decide if they want to pick them up and pick up their contracts. And there's an interesting reason for this. What most people don't understand is that when you sign a contract with an MLS team, you're actually signing a contract with the MLS, is who you're signing that deal with. And the MLS then allocates your rights to that team. So in this way, this is why all the drafting and stuff works and trading works within the MLS, because everybody's contract is with the MLS as a league, and it's just your contract rights which are being traded back and forth between the teams. So essentially, you bring in a big star player from outside the league, they're just agreeing to play in the MLS anywhere. It doesn't really matter. And then, in the olden days, the MLS would allocate their contracts around the league to make things more fair. Nowadays, it seems a little less transparent than it was in the early days. Now it seems like you're signing with FC Dallas, or it seems like you're signing with LA Galaxy, when in reality, they're just getting the rights to your contract from the MLS. So, for example, how that works, like say my juniors players, the reason there's no poaching in the MLS, right? Like let's say I got this winger here, George Hunt. Let's say New York City wants to come in and grab this guy, poach George Hunt from me. They can't do it. They can't just come in and offer him a contract and steal him away, because I own his contract rights in perpetuity, right? Forever. If this guy, George Hunt, ever wants to play in the MLS, he's got to come through FC Dallas. So if New York wants him, they have to trade me something of value to get the rights to sign him. That's how it works. That's how it works when players get drafted into the MLS. It's how it works with these academy players. This is why it's so difficult to come in and grab players from the United States. It's because their contracts are already signed, sealed, and delivered forever, right? Okay, so now that we got that settled, very passionate about that. The other thing that happened was I was a little bit over the salary cap. So what I had to do there is I had to use something called general allocation money. This is another weird little quirk of the MLS where you have this mystery money lying around. It's not part of your budget. It's not part of your transfer budget or your salary budget or anything like that. It's just this mystery money. And let's go to finances and check this out. If you see on the regular finance screen, things are looking pretty hunky-dory. Got $2.2 million transfer budget. That's fine. I got $6.7 million in payroll available, which is interesting. And then I'm currently using 5.3, even though the salary cap budget is much less than that, 3.8. So there's a lot of mystery money going on here with the MLS. And the best place to find all this mystery money is a screen that maybe you never went to, and that is this league specific, under finances, league specific tab. And this will show you all the mystery money that goes on with the MLS. First of all, here's your salary cap, 3.85 million, and it tells you your remaining salary cap. We got 800,000 remaining. That's pretty good. Transfer funds, nothing fishy there. We got 2.2 million. And here we got general allocation money. We have 95,000 available. We had 325,000 available at the start of the season. So what is allocation money? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Cotton Eye Joe, all that stuff. So allocation money is money given to you by MLS. Again, this is a very sort of socialist sports world that we live in here in the United States, even though nobody would ever categorize it like that. I'm telling you, it's the most socialist sporting event, the most socialist sporting system anywhere in the world is in the United States when it comes to their professional sports. So Major League Soccer will award you this allocation money. And they'll give you this allocation money for several different reasons. First of all, they just give every team $200,000 every year. Just hands it out. Here you go. If you transfer if you transfer a player to a club outside of the MLS, right? Let's say you go and sell a guy for $2 million or whatever it is. A percentage of that money goes to the MLS, and then a percentage of that percentage comes back to you as general allocation money because you sold a player, your team is now slightly a little worse because you lost a player, so they give you a little bit of money back as compensation. You also get some for, getting into the Champions League. You get some for failing to make the playoffs, which is interesting. You're rewarded for failure in the MLS. You're given $200,000 for not making the playoffs. And again, this is part of their fairness mechanisms. This is a part to make sure that the rich don't get richer and the poor don't get poorer. Very socialist kind of sentiment, but hey, it helps balance out the league. So now you got a little bit more of this funny money, this general allocation money to throw around. And so next season, maybe you can come back a little stronger. So there's many different ways to get this allocation money, but what do you spend it on? There's a couple of things you can spend it on. Number one, you can spend it on bringing new players into the league. There's this concept they have of a discovery player. A discovery player is a foreign player who's never played in the MLS before. You can bring them in and you can use some of this general allocation money to buy down their contract and to make their contract less impactful on your salary cap. And you can do that for any player, not just signing and re-signing players, which you can use it for, but once they're on your team and you get down to registration day and your team is over the cap, you can use this general allocation money to buy down their contracts. And how do you do that? Well, you go to your squad here and you look at your team. Let's see, where's contracts? Here we go. This is not showing me the salary cap impact. Why is that? Maybe because they're all impacting the cap at this point. Salary? No, it's showing the salary. Anyway, I was going to look for a team that had... Oh, I know. It's under registration. There we go. So let's look at a guy who's impacting the cap. Lawrence Ullum. He's impacting the cap. Let's look at his contract. Contract info. Currently, he's impacting the cap at $115,000. I have $94,000 in allocation money. Now, let's say I was $50,000 over the cap, and it's like I could either cut Lawrence or I could use some of this allocation money to buy down his contract, and you can see suddenly his cap impact is going down, 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 down. So I could bring him down, reduce that salary cap impact. Now my team would be under the salary cap. I could keep Lawrence on my team. Everything is hunky-dory. That's what you can use your salary, your general allocation money for. Just another mechanism to get around the salary cap. Just squeeze a few more dollars out of that salary cap using general allocation money. So I'm going to cancel that because I don't really want to do that. So there we go. And that brings us to our checklist. We're going to run down the checklist real quick. I showed you the finances. No problem there. Let's look at the board. Our job security, stable. This stuff hasn't really changed much from FM17. Board confidence. We got a few more things to look at here. Got competitions, matches, stature, transfers, philosophies, finance. All that was the same, but now we got a few more things here. We got atmosphere, support, and tactics. Let's take a look at these here. Locker room atmosphere. Board is content. There's an element of control over players in the locker room. That's good. Let's see. Can we look at... Is it club issues? No, I guess not. Anyway, leadership support. The board are satisfied that you have adequate backing and support from the players. So that gives you a much more defined role for this leadership support. What does this encompass? It doesn't necessarily encompass the board. It encompasses the players. Leadership support is the players. And then, of course, tactics. Fans are reserving judgment as to whether or not the right tactics are being used until they've seen a few more matches. So this is another new thing. This is about fan support, I suppose. If the fans are happy with the tactics you're using, then the board will be happy. That is something that has not been in previous games. Maybe it's been in the background with all those tweets and stuff that the fans send out and all the the questions that you got from the reporters were all about tactics. Like, are you going to be attacking? Are you going to play this guy or play that guy? All that kind of stuff. It was all tactical kind of questions. So now the board's going to pay attention to that stuff and say, hey, the fans are unhappy about the tactics you're using. You're not attacking enough. You're not defending enough. You're not controlling the ball enough. Whatever it is the fans want you to do, probably based on your club and your club history, I suppose. Like if you go to a team that's traditionally a club that holds the ball and passes and all that stuff, and that's what the fans like, maybe that's what you'll be expected to do. Maybe this will be part of what the board asks you to do, right? If the board asks you to play a more attacking style because that's how the rest of their fans like to play, then you're gonna have to keep track of that here. So that's something new and something interesting. Very happy about that. You go to the club. Look at, we're still a 3-star, secure finances, no problem. We're not in the Champions League at this moment. General, everything looks okay here. Nothing new and interesting. The previous coach is their favorite personnel, Oscar Pareja. Everybody loved Oscar, but, his time apparently was up and we took over. Jason Kreese and Lamar Hunt. We saw that earlier, the Lamar Hunt Trophy. If you looked at our competitions briefly, you saw his name flash up there. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So next on the checklist, everything here is fine and not much different. We're going to look at transfers. What have we done in the transfer market? What do transfers look like in the MLS? Well, they're not all that exciting. Let's take a look at our transfer history. We've done a few things. First of all, we signed 3 young players from our academy. I mentioned how that messed up my roster earlier, but then we had a couple of players in the draft, Tommy Thompson and Lawrence Ullum, which we saw earlier. You might ask yourself, what kind of draft was this? It seems like there's all kinds of drafts in the MLS, and there are all kinds of drafts in the MLS. One that we don't get to in the first season is the MLS Super Draft, and that is all the young players in college and university system here in the United States. If they want to come to the MLS, they, of course, sign their rights away to the MLS, and the MLS then places them into a draft where they get chosen by the various teams. Now, that is not this draft. This is the waiver draft. And this is where 3 of our players went. Actually, 4 of our players went. Gillian, Cortez, Harris, and Javier Morales. They all went into the waiver draft because I had to drop them from the roster. So this just shows you just a little bit of a different example of what happens to players in the MLS as opposed to other leagues around the world. So the teams in the league who participate in the waiver draft, they got to pick these guys up on free transfer. Just boom, pick them up. All you have to do is grab their contract. Now, you don't get a chance to renegotiate their contract. You got to take their contract as it is. Unless their contract is running out, then you can renegotiate. But for the original signing of the draft, for their purposes, you got to pick up those guys' contracts. So when you're in the waiver draft, that's another factor to look at. You got to look at their contract. Are they a designated player? Are they, are they a senior minimum contract. Whatever their contract is, that's the contract you're picking up, so you got to pay attention to that. And we picked up two guys, Tommy Thompson and Lawrence Olam, not just because they were kind of okay players, but also because they were senior contract players. Because we couldn't sign any more off-budget players, so we had to bring in a couple of senior contract players. So we got these two guys, Thompson and Olam, and we had to let go of these other guys, only one of whom got drafted, Javier Morales, 37-year-old. He's still a pretty decent player, but his physical stats were just going downhill, and we didn't really want him on the team anymore, so we let him go. And these other guys, Gillen, Cortez, and Harris, they're now free to go, right? Their rights are now free and clear. Once you've been in the MLS and your rights make it through this waiver period, you now become a true free agent and you can sign again with any team anywhere that you want. Let's see. So that's pretty much all that happened in terms of transfers. But we did have something in the way of trades, and this is something that a lot of other leagues either don't have or don't use very often. But I try to use it quite often in the MLS, and that is the trading system. So the first thing that I traded away was a player, and that was Roland Lamah. He was a 29-year-old Belgian, actually a pretty good player. And ordinarily I wouldn't have traded this guy away, but I wanted to get a feeling of the trading and see if it was better this time around. And I got an offer for this guy right away from New York. They offered me a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and $95,000 in general allocation money. And I showed you earlier what that general allocation money is good for. So I decided to go for this trade because if you look at this guy, all right, he's pretty valuable. He's worth about $2.4 million. So how does that equate to these numbers here? Now, I worked out some numbers last season. I'm going to check my notes here. You can see me flipping through my notes here. So last season in FM 17, I calculated that a first-round draft pick was worth about $500,000. And a second-round draft pick was worth about $300,000. So that's $800,000 right there. And then $95,000 for allocation money, close to $1 million. I mean, it's not great in terms of his value, but at 29 years old, if you can get, close to $1 million for a guy, that's pretty good. So I decided that that was a good deal, and it's pretty much the best deal I can imagine anybody in the MLS offering me for this guy. And that kind of shows you a little bit of the value propositions you got to work with in the MLS. Most of your transfers or trades in the MLS are going to be worth less than $1 million. And there's, a lot of reasons for that, not just the fact that the MLS teams don't have millions of dollars to spend, but also these fair play mechanisms that come into play. Like, you can't just trade straight up transfer money for these players because this isn't a transfer, this is a trade. So the only kind of currency you have other than players or draft picks is allocation money. And the most you can spend at any one time of allocation money is $500,000. So that's the value you really need to focus on when you're thinking about doing business in the MLS is $500,000. If it's above that, it's really good. If it's below that, it's subpar. But $500,000 is the real key number that you're going to get out of any kind of MLS transaction, honestly. So it's just a different way of thinking and a different mindset. And then the other thing that I did is I traded away a international slot for 1 year to Portland for a second-round draft pick. As I mentioned, second-round draft pick is $300,000, and I valued the international slot last season for 1 year valued at about $150,000. Like that's kind of what you could get on the open market for an international slot. So basically, a second round pick is worth $300,000. So if I gave them 1 year plus 170,000, that would be, 320,000. So they made 20,000 on the deal, but it got me a draft pick, a second round draft pick, which is pretty good. And it showed that mechanism of transferring international slots around from team to team, and what sort of value you can expect to get from these guys. All right, so that's my transfers. Not terribly exciting, but a lot of interesting stuff to see there. Now let's look at our competitions. I showed these briefly earlier for a split second, but now we can look at it in depth. What sort of competitions do you have to look forward to in the MLS? Now you can see there's several of them, and it starts down here with the well, no, let's start most important to least important. Let's start with Major League Soccer right here. Now, what is this competition? This is the MLS Cup competition. And that's what this really is. This is about winning your conference. As you can see here, there's only 11 teams here. This is the Western Conference. That's the conference that we're in. And what you want to do here is you want to finish no lower than 6th place, because 6th place will get you a spot in the MLS playoffs. And the MLS playoffs is the MLS Cup competition. And that's really, even though our board expectations is just be competitive, which I don't really know what that means. That means probably just don't finish last. But really, I think any year that you participate in the MLS, making the playoffs should be your minimum expectation. If you can't reach at least 6th place in your conference, something's wrong. Either your conference is really dominant that year, top to bottom, or there's just something wrong with your team. Because if you can't finish in 6th out of 11 teams, like, what are you even doing playing this game? Come on. All right, so that's what this competition is. And really, it is the most prestigious competition when you talk about the MLS. Most sports fans in the United States, when they ask who wins the MLS, right? Who won the MLS last year? They're talking about the MLS Cup. Now, diehard sports, soccer fans might disagree with you, but your average sports fan on the street, they want to know who won the playoffs, who won the MLS Cup. That's what makes the MLS Cup the more prestigious of the competitions. Now, the other competition, as I mentioned, is the Supporter Shield. And the Supporter Shield is a combination of both conferences. As you can see, there are 22 teams in the Supporter Shield competition. And this is what you think of as a more traditional soccer championship, right? This is the regular season championship. Team with the best record, team that scored the most points, they're the Supporter Shield champion in the MLS. And it is a very prestigious award for MLS. It counts as one, like the silverware. When you're looking to win some silverware, MLS Supporter Shield is a great one to win. You get some prize money for it. That's outstanding. And, you do get recognition from the fans, from the media, from everybody to saying you are the Supporter Shield champion. You had the best regular season, and that really, just like any other league around the world, it shows that you're the most consistent team for the season, week in, week out. You were the best franchise. It still takes second place to the MLS Cup, I'm sorry to say, but it's still a pretty good win. And the third major championship in the U.S. is the U.S. Cup. So if you want to win the triple crown of U.S. soccer, you want to win the MLS Cup, the Supporters Shield, and the U.S. Cup. Those are the three big competitions. Now, what the U.S. Cup is it's the coast-to-coast nationwide competition. It encompasses all of the lower division teams as well, and it's a one and done playoff system, gigantic tournament where you're all playing to win the U.S. Cup Championship, and that gets you into the North American Champions League, which is the highest level competition you can play as a North American soccer club. North American Champions League, I personally really enjoy that competition. You get to play against teams from all over the place, from Canada all the way down to Panama, everywhere in between, Honduras, Nicaragua, Jamaica, of course, Mexico. Those are usually the toughest, strongest teams are in Mexico. But getting a spot in the North Americans Champions League just adds so much flavor to your season. I really enjoy it. So the US Cup is very prestigious just for that reason, just because the winner gets it into the Champions League. Now, as far as the average sports fan is concerned here in the United States, most of them don't even know the US Cup exists. Even fewer of them probably know that the North American Champions League exists. So, in terms of the greater sports arena, it's not very prestigious. But in the soccer world, it is pretty prestigious to win the US Cup. And it's important to note that you also get a bid into the Champions League by winning the Supporters' Shield or by winning the MLS Cup. So there are three ways to get into the Champions League as an MLS team. But the US Cup is a way to get into that Champions League if maybe you're not having as much success in the Supporters' Shield or in the MLS Cup playoffs. All right, these final competitions are just small, sort of friendly competitions, I guess you'd say. You got the Brimstone Cup versus Chicago. I'm not sure why we play against Chicago every season. It's just sort of a cross conference rivalry. It probably goes back to the early parts of the league because Chicago is one of the original teams in the league. So maybe that's just like our first rival. I don't know where that exactly comes from. Then we got the Lamar Hunt Pioneer Cup, another cross-conference rivalry with Columbus. I recently found out that we play this game versus Columbus because Lamar Hunt, who is the patriarch of the Hunt family who owns FC Dallas, he once owned the Columbus Crew. So in the early days of the MLS, he was like one of the originators of the league. He built one of the first stadiums for the MLS for the Columbus Crew, and so he was a pioneer in the sport, a pioneer in the league, and so we play the Pioneer Cup. So there's a nice bit of MLS history right there in the Pioneer Cup. And then finally we got the Texas Derby versus Houston Dynamo. And Houston is our main rival in the sport, in the league, in basically any sport. If you want to know who's the rival of the Dallas team, it's probably going to be Houston. If they're playing football or basketball or, God forbid, hockey, if there's a team in Dallas, there's probably a team in Houston, and they're probably rivals. So that's just the way it goes in Texas. It's like that in a lot of states, but everybody's got a big rival if there's another city nearby. And Houston is our nemesis. So that's a game that's important to the fans. Maybe it's not so important to the board, obviously, but the fans will definitely tweet at you and react to this game and say, "Hey, we need to beat Houston." So if it's important for fan support to win this Texas Derby. All right. I think we've talked about so much stuff. Let me check my notes again. I'm starting to take notes here because I got so much stuff to talk about. Let's see. Finances, board, club, waiver draft, trades, academy, all that stuff. Dynamics. We haven't looked at the dynamics. That's right. There's been updates. I've been messing around. I've been playing with this dynamic screen to see what I can get away with, to see how I can manipulate this system. And as you can see, things have improved greatly since the preseason. Match cohesion is up to good. Our players have developed, some very strong bonds on the pitch. In the locker room, the atmosphere has also improved. It's gone up to average, which is very good. Leadership support is still a little low. It is average, but it's on the low side of average. And one of the reasons why is I tried to trade Michael Barrios. And he's unhappy that I tried to get him out of here. And 4 players agree with him. Can we see which 4 agree with him? I don't know if we. Oh, here we go. Supporting teammate Max Arudi. This is interesting that they've built this stuff so well into the game. So we got Reggie Cannon, 18-year-old fullback, just sort of. I don't know what his deal is. Carlos Greza and Max Arudi. What's interesting is that in real life, FC Dallas tried to trade Michael Barrios and Max Arudi, I think to New York. They tried to trade him somewhere. I forgot where they tried to get rid of him to. They didn't even try to trade him. They might have tried to transfer them out to another. I don't know. But they did try to get rid of both of those guys as a package deal. And both of those guys nixed it and said, no, we're not going. We want to stay at FC Dallas. And, that caused some tension at FC Dallas. And I tried to do the same thing here. I tried to send out Michael Barrios. I didn't try to, I tried to trade him within the MLS, and I got no bids for him. 0 bids. Nobody was even interested in him. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is he's a designated player, so if a team wants him, they have to have a designated player slot available and have a need at that position. So it's very difficult to trade a designated player within MLS. And the other reason is his contract runs out in a year. So these teams are looking and say, well, I could either trade for him and give up a bunch of stuff like draft picks or whatever, or I could just wait till the end of the year and pick him up for free in a waiver draft or something like that. As a free agent, get him on a free transfer. So MLS teams are very cagey about waiting out teams at the end of their contract. And that's why in American sports, there's a concept called the sign and trade. I don't know if they have that around the world, but it's very popular in the NBA. It's somewhat popular in the NFL and the NHL. But basically what you do, if you want to trade a player, you have to sign him first. You sign him to a contract that's kind of, a longer term contract, 2 or 3 years at least. And, has a pretty decent salary, make him enticing to another team and say, look, you can get this guy now for 2 or 3 years instead of getting him just for a year and have to worry about signing him at the end of the year. So if I wanted to trade Michael Barrios, if I was really, really intent on trading him, I might have to do the counterintuitive thing of signing him to a new contract. And that would make him, more valuable to another team in the MLS. But I couldn't trade him in the MLS, so I put him out for bid to teams outside the MLS. Now this is a bit of a cheese of the system, because you noticed earlier, in the transfer market, I traded away. Let's see, where is it? Not draft. Transfer history, trades. I traded away Roland Lamah to New York. Nobody said a word. Nobody on the squad said, hey, why'd you trade this guy? Roland Lamah himself didn't say a word, didn't say I don't want to go, said absolutely nothing. There was no impact at all from trading this guy away in terms of negative impact to a team within the MLS. Now, when I did the same thing to Michael Barrios, I tried to trade him to a team with the MLS. He said nothing. Nobody on the team said anything. But the moment I put him out for bid to teams around the world, everybody on the team said, hey, what are you doing? Why are you trying to get rid of this guy? He's a team leader. He's this, he's that. So that's a way to cheese this system. If you want to get rid of players and you don't want to take the hit in terms of the dynamics, trade them to another team in the MLS. It'll be like he never existed. Nobody on your team will care one bit. So that was what happened with our dynamics in terms of Michael Barrios, why we've taken a little bit of a hit. But the reason why we've raised things so well is we've got a bit of a change in our hierarchy. And as you can see here, Matt Hedges and Maynard Figueroa have moved up into the team leadership roles. Now for Figueroa, he moved up because he's become a starter. So the fact that he's now in the starting position, that's given him a boost in terms of the rest of the players on the team. They now are looking up to him more as a starting player. And so he's moved up into that position with his 13 leadership, much better than the 8 leadership of the previous guy. And then the other thing we did was we demoted our captains during preseason. We demoted our captains and we added Matt Hedges as one of our captains. And as you can see here, he's wearing the captain's armband. So, that boosted his profile, and he's got much better leadership. He's got 15 leadership, the best leader on the team. Experienced player, MLS Defender of the Year. So just putting his leadership at the top of this pyramid instantly increased our dynamics across the board. It was, one game. I just put him in the leadership, played a game, and the next game our dynamics skyrocketed. Our locker room atmosphere, our match cohesion, leadership support, everything went through the roof. Now I then dragged it back down by trying to get rid of Barrios. But it seems like changing your captains might not be as detrimental as it was last version in FM17 if you do it right. If you put the right guy in there at captain, it can have a big effect on your locker room, even if you're changing captains from another guy. So that's my hint for dynamics so far. Trade players away rather than putting them out for bid, and put your best guy at captain, and that'll help everybody out. All right, so we're going to end it here. We're going to cut this video off. It's getting a little long, so we're going to finish this up, and we'll show some of the season, and we'll show some of the gameplay. Maybe in the next video, well, definitely in the next video, we won't have much to look at other than, a game, and we'll show you our progress throughout the season. Maybe we'll come back like mid-season so you can see the progress of this team. You can see our dynamics in action, see if we're able to get rid of some of the malcontents, or at least placate them, make them a little happier, and yeah, hopefully things will turn out all right, but I don't have good feelings about this team. This team feels a little fragile mentally and physically, and just I don't like their makeup. I don't like their composition. I'd really love to start bringing in some more of my academy players, some more young players through the draft and things like that. I don't know, and just look for the right kind of players out there in the transfer market. When we talk about bringing in international players, I think they need to be players with the right mentality and the right kind of stats that we need. More leaders, more players who fit into the social group and who are just going to buy into this team rather than just be talented guys. Like I don't think Michael Barrios, he's obviously not a good leader. And I think everything wrong with this team kind of starts with him. So I'd like to get rid of him. His contract runs out, and then I can start bringing in players who play more my style and have more like the attitude that I want on this team. So we'll come back then. We'll show a game. We'll talk about the new match engine and stuff like that, and kind of give that room to breathe. So it'll be another video now without showing a game, and maybe that's kind of death for Football Manager videos. But anyway, that's what we're going to do. So we'll see you next time. Right? Is that the outro? See you next time? No, until next time. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.